The tank truck came down Cane Fork Road a little after 7 on a Thursday morning in October of 1973, and by the time it reached the Boykin place, 4 pickups had slowed to a crawl behind it just to see where it was going. It was the Creamery's truck. Everybody in Tullum County knew it. The dented stainless tank with the faded lettering, the one that hauled milk in from the dairy farms every morning of the world. Except it wasn't hauling milk now, and it wasn't headed to a dairy. It backed down a chert gravel lane toward a hog lot that had stood empty for most of a decade, eased up against a long concrete trough, and opened its valve. What poured out was not milk. It was thin and greenish white, and it steamed a little in the cool air, and the smell of it drifted clear out to the road, sharp and sour like a churn nobody had scalded. Close to 900 gallons of it, give or take, running into that trough while 30-some hogs came off the hillside at a dead run like they'd been called by name. The men idling on the road shook their heads. One of them laughed out loud with his window down, because everybody in that county knew what that liquid was. It was whey, the watery leavings the creamery drained off when it made cheese. The stuff the plant had been pouring into a sinkhole for 20 years. The stuff that had lately gotten them in trouble with the state. It was, by every measure anybody used, garbage, and the creamery was now hauling its garbage 9 miles out from town and giving it away for free to the only man in Tullum County who had ever asked for it. That man stood at the end of the trough, with a tally book sticking out of the bib of his overalls, watching the hogs drink. He was 25 years old. He was not a hogman, not by trade. His people had never run more than a few meat hogs for the smokehouse, and he himself had spent the last 4 years building tires at a plant in Nashville. The driver, a heavyset man named J.T. Mabry, who had hauled milk for 27 years and figured he'd seen every kind of foolishness a farm could produce, shut the valve, coiled the hose, and stopped beside him on the way back to the cab. He said it kindly, the way you'd warn a man about a bridge that was out. He said he'd watched 3 Whey operations go under in his hauling years, that the stuff scoured pigs and soured lots and broke the men who fooled with it, and that there was a reason nobody wanted it. It ain't free, he said, if it kills your hogs. The young man thanked him for it. He meant it, too. Then he asked whether the plant could run him a second load in the afternoons. If you believe the best inheritance isn't always money, and that some fortunes start out smelling like something everybody else drives past with the windows up, stay with this one to the end. It earns it. And if you're watching from a small town, a back road, or a place with a smokehouse still standing out back, tell us where in the comments. We read everyone. His name was Ezell Boykin, and 18 months earlier he had owned exactly 1 pair of work boots and no hogs at all. The land was the old part of the story. 54 acres on Cane Fork, bought in 1911 by his great-grandfather Elias Boykin, who had hauled cedar posts and saved for 11 years to do it, back when a black man buying good bottomland in Tullum County was a thing some folks said out loud couldn't be done. The Boykins had held it through everything the century threw at them. They raised tobacco on the flat, ran a few cows on the hill, and killed hogs every November cold snap the way their neighbors did. What set the place apart for 40 years was the smokehouse. It was a square log building behind the main house, chinked tight, dark as a cellar inside, and from some time in the 1930s until 1968, it had belonged to Ezell's grandmother, Ezell Boykin, and to the country hams she hung in it. People drove out from 3 counties for Odessa's hams. The county agent brought a man from the university once, just to look at her smokehouse, and she stood in the door and answered his questions in about 11 words total. She never wrote down a recipe that anybody knew of. She salted by feel and hung by the weather, and every March she'd run her thumb along a hanging ham. Press it just so, and know things about the inside of it that no thermometer could tell you. She died in the winter of 1969, and the smokehouse door had stayed shut since. Ezell's father, Curtis, kept the farm going after that, quiet and careful, right up until a November evening in 1971 when his heart quit on him between the barn and the back porch. He was 53. Ezell came home from Nashville for the funeral and never went back. It wasn't a decision so much as an arithmetic. His mother, Vernell, cleaned houses in town 2 days a week. His brother, Dwayne, was 16 and in school. There was $312 owed in back taxes, a tobacco base too small to live on, and 100 small jobs his father had been quietly holding shut with baling wire. Somebody had to be there. So in the spring of 1972, at 24, Ezell Boykin found himself walking fence lines he'd walked as a boy, adding up what the place could earn against what it cost, and coming up short every single time. It was the tax bill that sent him into the smokehouse. He'd gotten it into his head that he might sell the old poplar meat benches to an antique dealer in Nashville, the kind who bought country things off people who needed the money. And he went in with a flashlight one wet April morning to see what shape they were in. The building still smelled like his childhood. Hickory smoke had gone so deep into those logs that 4 years of standing empty hadn't touched it. Hickory and salt, and something underneath that was just time. The benches were there, the iron hooks were there, rows of them overhead, dark with old grease, and on the inside of the cedar door low, where you'd only see it with the door swung shut and a light in your hand, there was writing. It was his grandmother's pencil. He knew it the way you know a voice. Column after column, going back years, most of it faded to ghosts. Dates, tallies of hams by the year. And down the left side, deeper and gone over, the way you'd write a thing you meant to keep, was what he would come to think of as her calendar. Kill cold, never ahead of it. Salt a day and a half to the pound and not one sunrise more. Wash, hang, and let March do the judging. Smoke slow. Hickory. No blaze. If it drips, you built the fire for pride, not for the ham. And at the bottom, half rubbed out where a latch bar had ridden against the wood for 30 years, one more line. He had to angle the flashlight to raise it. The ham ain't the crop, it said. The waiting is. He stood there a long time with the light on that door. He was a young man with a tax bill, and the writing didn't pay it. But he didn't sell the benches. He told himself, driving back to the house, that it was because the dealer's offer would be insulting anyway. That wasn't the whole reason, and some part of him knew it even then. He copied every line of that door into a spiral notebook that night at the kitchen table. And it would be almost 2 years before he understood the last line at all. And when he finally did, standing in that same doorway, it would not mean what he thought it meant now. We'll get there. Here is what a young man learns fast when he tries to turn 54 acres into a living in 1972. Everything that makes money costs money first. Tobacco was capped by the base. Cattle wanted 2 years and grass he didn't have enough of. Hogs, though. Hogs turned quick. A pig became a market hog in under 6 months. And Tullum County had a stockyard, a Thursday sale, and men who'd been making a living at it forever. It also had, 9 miles from his front porch, the biggest hogman in that end of the state, a wide, sunburnt, entirely capable farmer named Burl Chaston, who ran better than 700 head on bought corn, and liked to say that a hog was just a machine for turning grain into a check. The arithmetic was the problem. Corn stood around $1.25 a bushel that spring. Feed was 2/3 the cost of every pound a hog gained, and a man starting with nothing couldn't buy enough grain to matter. Ezell sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and figured it 6 ways. 6 ways the feed bill ate him alive. The answer came, the way answers do in a small county, from standing around in a store. Culp's Grocery sat at the crossroads 2 miles up, and Sanford Culp ran the kind of establishment where the news arrived before the bread truck did. It was there, in June of 1972, that Ezell heard 2 dairy farmers laughing about the Creamery's troubles. Tullum Valley Creamery had been making cheddar in town since the 20s, and for just as long it had been getting rid of its Whey the cheap way, draining it off into a sinkhole behind the plant that fed, eventually, into Blue Hole Creek. That October, the federal government had passed a new water law with teeth in it, and the state had come around with a notice. No more Whey in the sinkhole. The plant was hauling it to a lagoon now at their own cost, the farmers said, and the manager was reported to be in a mood about it that you could feel from the loading dock. Most men heard that story as weather. Ezell heard it as a door coming open, because one of the things his grandmother's generation knew, and his father's generation half remembered, and his own generation had never needed to learn, was that whey would feed a hog. Not well, not by itself, and not without knowing what you were doing. But the old folks had slopped hogs on churn leavings since before anybody's memory. And somewhere under all that, he figured, there had to be arithmetic worth doing. He did it that night. What he knew was this: cheese is a concentrating business. It takes about 10 pounds of milk to make a pound of cheddar, and roughly 9 pounds of what's left runs off as whey. A plant the size of Tullum Valleys was pouring off thousands of gallons a day, every day, and paying money, real money, to make it disappear. Whey was mostly water, but not entirely. Riding along in it was milk sugar, a little true protein, minerals, the last sweetness of the milk, feed value, in other words, flowing into a lagoon. The Creamery's problem and his problem were the same problem, standing on opposite ends. They had a river nobody wanted. He had hungry hogs and no river. The manager of Tullum Valley Creamery was a flat-voiced, quick-eyed woman named Whey Ledbetter, who had worked every station in that plant since 1951, and did not, as a rule, get offered things for free. When a 24-year-old in clean overalls sat across her desk and asked to haul her whey away at no charge to her, she looked at him the way a banker looks at a stranger's check. She asked him what his angle was. He told her the angle was hogs, and that the only thing he'd ever ask her for was a steady supply and first refusal on it. She had him wait while she pulled a folder and did her own figuring, because Whey Ledbetter had never in her life taken a deal she hadn't priced from both sides. The lagoon hauling was costing the plant real money every month, and the state man was due back in the spring. A farm boy with a tank was cheaper than a lagoon. She said he could have 200 gallons a day to start, said it like she was daring him to fail, and told him the first time he missed a pickup and left her whey standing, the deal was off. He missed no pickups, not that summer, not ever. What he hauled it in was its own local entertainment. He'd bought a 275-gallon dairy tank, second-hand and dented, off a farm sale in the next county for $31, and bolted it to the bed of his father's 1958 Ford flatbed. Twice a day that truck came through the edge of town, riding low, sloshing at the stop sign by the Baptist church, trailing its thin, sour smell down the square. It took about a week for the town to name it. The slop wagon. That was the word that stuck to him, the way a word will in a small place. The slop wagon, and Ezell himself, before long, was the slop boy. Burl Chastain said it first, as far as anybody could establish, leaning on a gate at the Thursday sale. Somebody asked him if he'd seen what the Boykin boy was doing out on Cane Fork, and Burl worked his toothpick over and said he had, and that he'd known men to farm dirt and men to farm cattle. But this was the first he'd known a man to farm what the rest of the county flushed. Hogs are a grain business, he said. Always have been. You can't slop your way into it. It wasn't said mean exactly. That was the thing about the doubt Ezell drew. It was reasonable. It came from men who knew hogs, quoting arithmetic that was true. And the name they hung on him got repeated at Culp's counter and the feed store and after church, not as cruelty, just as fact. The slop boy. His mother heard it at the houses she cleaned. Dwayne heard it at school and got in one fight over it that Ezell never learned about for 6 years. He started with 11 feeder pigs, bought at the stockyard in July of 1972, with most of what was left of his Nashville savings. And inside 3 weeks, the county nearly got to be right. He did what a beginner does. He had a trough and a tank of free feed, and he filled one with the other and let the pigs have it. By the 4th day, the youngest pigs were scouring, hunched, and rough-coated, and draining away in front of him. And by the end of the week, he had lost 4 of the 11, buried them himself at the wood line, and sat on the tailgate figuring out loud what he owed and what he had, which came to nearly the same number. It would have been a fine time to quit. Half the county was already telling the story in the past tense. His mother never said quit. That has to be put down here, because it mattered more than any one thing that happened in a lot or a smokehouse. Ezell Boykin had buried a husband 8 months earlier and watched her ost walk away from the only steady paycheck in the family. And what she did about it was set a plate in front of him every evening and ask him what the pigs ate that day like she was asking after neighbors. The night he buried the 4th pig, She came out to the porch where he was sitting in the dark and stood beside him a while without a word. Somewhere down the bottom the June bugs were droning, and the whip-poor will had started up across the creek. She looked out at the black shape of the smokehouse against the sky, and said that her mother-in-law had lost whole winters of meat in her day more than once, and had never in 40 years let it be the last thing that happened. Then she went back in and let the screen door close soft behind her. Ezell sat there until the dew came down. In the morning he fed the 7 pigs that were left, half rations, watching every one of them like a hawk. Instead, he went and found the one man left in that end of Tennessee, who had made his living at the exact trade Ezell was fumbling toward. Hollis Whitfield was 74 years old and lived alone on the Ridley Fork with a bird dog and a John boat. And for 39 years he had been the head man at a commercial ham house over in the next county, the kind of operation that cured thousands of hams a season for city trade, until it closed in 1967 and nobody hired a 68-year-old ham man for anything. Ezell found him on his porch shelling October beans. He introduced himself as Ezell Boykin's grandson, and the old man looked at him for a moment, and then told him that in 1951 he had traded Ezell Boykin a started bird dog for one ham, straight across, and that he'd come out so far ahead on the deal he'd been half ashamed to shake on it. Then he asked what Ezell wanted. Ezell told him the truth. He had 7 pigs, a tank of whey, a smokehouse full of his grandmother's handwriting, and no idea in the world what he was doing. Hollis Whitfield rocked on that for a while. A man his age had watched plenty of young men want things right up until the work started. What he said, when he finally said it, Ezell wrote in the spiral notebook that night, under his grandmother's calendar, where it stayed. "Whey's a drink, boy, not a dinner, and a ham's not made in a smokehouse. It's made in the lot 2 years before, in what walks into the salt. You want to learn the end of this business, you'll learn the front of it first." Then he stood up, dusted the bean strings off his lap, and told Ezell to come back Saturday morning with his truck, because there was no sense teaching a man anything over a porch rail that you could teach him better standing in a hog lot. That Saturday began an education that would run, in one form or another, for the next 7 years. What Hollis Whitfield taught him first had nothing to do with smoke. It had to do with a bucket and a measure, and a habit of restraint. "Whey," the old man explained, standing in the Boykin lot that first Saturday, "is better than 9 parts water. What's left after the water is mostly milk sugar, a shirt-tail of protein and minerals, and a pig's gut can only handle so much milk sugar in a day before it turns loose of everything it's holding." That was the Scours. You don't pour whey, you ration it warm and fresh, never soured past its 2nd day, and you back it with something solid, corn or shorts or peas, so the pig gets its protein from somewhere with a spine to it. The old-timers had a saying that whey made the bacon and corn made the pig, and like most old sayings, it was arithmetic wearing overalls. Fed right, a hog on whey and a little grain gained near as fast as a hog on full corn, at a fraction of the feed bill. And the meat came off the cure sweet and mild, in a way corn alone never gave you. Fed wrong, you buried pigs at the woodline. Ezell had done it wrong for 1 week and would do it right for the rest of his life. He built measuring into the trough itself, a marked stick wired to a post, and fed by the stick twice a day from then on, adjusting by the size of the hog and the season, keeping tally in the book in his bib pocket. The 7 survivors made it to market weight by December of 1972. He sold 3 at the Thursday sale and paid the tax bill with $11 to spare. And the other 4 he killed for the smokehouse the week before Christmas, because he could not make himself wait another year to try. That impatience cost him. His grandmother's first line said, "Kill cold, never ahead of it." And that December came in soft and stayed soft, the kind of gray 40-degree weather that fools a young man into calling it winter. Hollis was down with his back that week. Ezell salted 8 hams by the calendar's measure, a day and a half to the pound, stacked them on the poplar benches, and told himself the cold would come along behind him. It didn't come for 11 days. Salt works from the outside in, and it races the inside of the ham the whole way. And in soft weather, deep at the bone where the salt arrives last, the meat can turn before the cure gets there. The old people called it bone sour, and there is no fixing it, no trimming it out, no smoking over it. You find it in March with a sharpened sliver of bone, run in along the joint, and drawn out and passed under your nose. And the smell tells you everything in half a second. In March of 1973, with Hollis standing beside him in the smokehouse, working the bone skewer like a man taking a pulse, Ezell learned he had lost 6 of his first 8 hams. The old man didn't dress it up. He said the weather had done exactly what weather does, and the boy had done exactly what boys do, and that between the two of them, they'd made 6 hams worth of tuition. Then he held up one of the 2 good ones and told him to pay attention, because this, right here, was what his grandmother's door had been trying to tell him. The ham wasn't ruined by anything he did in December. It was ruined by what he wouldn't do, which was wait. The 2 good hams changed things anyway. Hollis carried one home, on the old terms, a ham for his teaching, straight across. The other one Vernell cooked at Easter. And the people who ate a slice of it at that table did not talk about it like food. They talked about it like something remembered. An older cousin put her fork down and said it tasted like Odessa's kitchen in 1958, and got quiet and had to be excused to the porch a minute. Ezell was 25 years old and had produced exactly 2 hams in his life, and one of them had made a grown woman cry at Easter dinner. A man can run a long way on that. He ran. That spring of 1973, he went back to Faye Ledbetter and asked for the second daily load, and she priced it from both sides the way she priced everything and said yes. Because the state man had been back, and the lagoon was filling, and a farm that could document where every gallon went was worth more to her than the hauling saved. By summer, she had quit making him haul it at all. It was cheaper, she'd worked out, to send the plant's own truck on its way back empty from the morning milk run. And that was how, on a Thursday in October of 1973, the tank truck came down Cane Fork Road with 4 pickups slowing behind it. And J.T. Mabry coiled his hose and warned a young man about a bridge that was already carrying him fine. 36 head drank from that concrete trough by then. Ezell had poured the trough himself in June and bought 31 weanling pigs through the spring and summer with the ham money he didn't have yet, which is to say on a note at Planters Bank of Drennan for $760 that made his mother go quiet for 2 days. The smokehouse filled that second winter the way it was supposed to. The cold came honest in December of 1973, and he killed into it, and 61 hams went to salt under Hollis's eye by Odessa's calendar, weighed and dated in pencil in the spiral notebook. What the calendar knew, and what Hollis put words to, was that a country ham is not preserved so much as it is slowly, deliberately transformed, and that every season of the year has a job in it. Winter salt draws the water out and walks the cure to the bone. Late winter, the hams rest and equalize, the salt evening itself through the meat. Spring, you wash them, hang them, and give them smoke, cool hickory smoke, days of it for the skin and the color and the edge it puts on the flavor. And then comes the part no factory has ever found a shortcut around, the summer sweat. Through the long heat, the ham hangs and loses weight, a quarter of itself or more, and its own enzymes work through the muscle the whole time, breaking it down, concentrating it, building the deep red color and the old nutty, almost smoky sweet taste that made people drive 3 counties for Ezell Boykin's hams. 9 months at the least, Hollis said. 10 or 12 is better. You can rush a hog. You cannot rush a ham. Every mouthful of a real one is mostly time. The county watched all this sideways and kept its verdict. The slop boy had himself a slop herd now, and a banknote besides. And men at the stockyard said the word note, the way you'd report a fever. What they were pricing that year was corn, and corn had begun to behave strangely. It had started the summer before, far away, when the Russians came quietly into the American grain market and bought it nearly bare, and the price of everything a hog eats started climbing and did not stop. J.T. Mabry talked about it on the Whey runs. Hollis listened to the grain reports out of Nashville on the radio every noon with his eyes shut. And one day in the fall of 1973 he opened them and told Ezell that corn was fixing to get proud, and that proud corn made poor hogmen out of everybody who bought it. "Lay in pigs," he said. "Every pig this county panics loose of, you be standing there." Ezell would remember that as the moment the story turned, though it didn't feel like a turn at the time, it felt like watching rain come across a field toward somebody else. Corn had stood at $1.28 a bushel the June he started. By the summer of 1974, it touched $3.42. For a man who bought every bite his hogs ate, the arithmetic simply flipped upside down. It now cost more to put a pound on a hog than the pound brought at the sale barn. All over that end of Tennessee, hogmen did the only sane thing, which was quit. They sold down their herds into a falling market, sows and weanlings and all, and feeder pigs that had brought $40 went begging at 11. Burl Chastain, who ran the biggest corn-fed operation in the county, and had never in 30 years been wrong about hogs in public, sold from 700 head down to 240 between March and September. And every Thursday the yard was full of men doing the same math and coming to the same bitter answer. Ezell's math was different, and the whole county could suddenly see it. His feed flowed downhill from the Creamery for nothing, and the little corn he backed it with was a seasoning, not a diet. While the price of feeding a hog tripled around him, his cost barely moved. He went to the panic sales with the bank's money, and Hollis at his elbow, and bought weanlings at $11 and $13 a head. Good pigs, better than he could have afforded in any sane year. And by the fall of 1974, he was feeding 120 head on the slop the county had named him for. The summer tried him once more before it paid him. In July, the ham skipper flies found his smokehouse, the little dark flies whose eggs become the burrowing larvae every ham house dreads. And he lost 9 hams from the spring hang before he and Hollis and Dwayne, out of school now and working the place full-time, spent 3 days screening every vent with fine mesh, sealing the door, and coating each remaining ham the old way, rubbed over with black pepper until it wore a dark crust the flies wouldn't cross. The red wasps that nested in the eaves got evicted in the same war. 52 hams came through. In September, he sold the first of them across the counter at Culp's Grocery, whole and paper-wrapped, and Sanford Culp put one in his own front window, and they were gone, all he'd a lot, in 19 days. The admission, when it came at the stockyard, which is where everything in that county was eventually said. A gray Thursday in late October of 1974, pens half empty because half the county was out of the hog business. And Burl Chastain came down the alley to where Ezell stood and looked at him a while over the rail. He asked what the Creamery charged for the whey these days. Ezell said what it had always cost, nothing. Burl nodded slow, like a man checking a figure he'd already run. He said he had spent 30 years telling people a hog was a machine for turning grain into a check, and that this year the machine had run backwards and eaten the check. Then he said the sentence that got repeated at Culp's counter for 20 years, in more or less these words: I fed $3 corn to $11 pigs. You fed what I laughed at. County named the wrong end of that deal the slop. He had 41 weanlings left of his spring pig crop, he said, and he'd rather they drank Ezell's slop than ate his corn, and if Ezell would take them on shares he'd count it a favor. Ezell took them, not because he needed the favor, because his grandmother would have. After that, the story stops being a fight and becomes a build, which is how the true ones mostly go. The corn market came back to earth in time, but the men who'd been burned came back careful, and the county's hog business never crowded him. His ham business did the opposite of crowding. It compounded. In 1975, he cured 240 hams, and the state inspector walked his smokehouse and licensed him to sell across the counter. And a Nashville meat and 3 owner named Pearline Autry, who had grown up on a Tullum County tobacco farm and had spent years pronouncing every ham in the city a disappointment, drove out unannounced, tasted a slice off the knife standing in his lot, and ordered 24 whole hams on the spot with the understanding, delivered in a voice that had run a kitchen for 26 years, that everyone had better be the twin of the slice. That standing account taught him the last hard trade lesson, which was consistency, grading his green hams by weight so they'd cure even, culling any ham the bone skewer doubted, because a restaurant forgives you nothing and a reputation is only ever rented. In 1977, he and Dwayne built a long cinderblock aging house behind the old smokehouse, with screened gables and hickory smoke ducted in from a firebox outside. And the old log building where Odessa's pencil marks still climbed the door became the first room of the tour he'd give buyers. And he never cured a ham anywhere else but under her calendar's rules. By 1979, the Boykin place killed and cured 2,740 hams in a season, whey-fed, pepper-crusted, hung 10 months minimum, and in 1980 the books at Planters Bank showed the farm had grossed a little over $107,000 in the year, which was 6 figures in a county where the courthouse clock had been broken since 1961, and everybody knew it. And nobody called it slop anymore. The Creamery outlasted its fines and never forgot who'd solved them. Fay Ledbetter signed the first written contract of the whole arrangement in 1976, mostly so her successors couldn't be stupid about it. And when a second cheese plant 2 counties over came asking to dump on him too, she negotiated Ezell's terms for him, harder than he'd have dared. J.T. Mabry retired from the milk run in 1978 and went straight onto Ezell's payroll, driving finished hams to Nashville 2 mornings a week in a panel truck, and would tell anybody who rode with him that he was the only man in Tennessee who'd warned a fellow off the best idea in the county, and then spent his old age getting paid by it. Hollis Whitfield lived to see all of it. He was 82 the October. The new aging house filled to the rafters for the first time, and Ezell walked him down the rows with a knife, and the old man took a shaving off a ham from the middle rack, ate it slow with his eyes shut the way he listened to the grain reports, and said that somewhere Ezell Boykin was telling the whole porch she'd got the better end of another trade. It was the closest thing to a diploma the trade had ever offered anybody. And it was that same evening, alone, lantern in hand, that Ezell swung the old cedar door shut and read the bottom line again, the one the latch bar had half worn away. The ham ain't the crop. The waiting is. He was 32 now, and he finally understood that his grandmother had not been writing about meat. Every ham in that aging house was just proof of something that had been planted long before he was born, in a man who saved 11 years for 54 acres, in a woman who let March do the judging, in a family that had held on through every year the century tried to shake them loose. What the Boykins grew, what they had always grown, was people who could wait. The whey, the hogs, the smoke, the money, all of it was only the waiting, made visible. He took the carpenter's pencil off the sill, and low on the door, under her last line, he added the date in one word: still. The tank truck comes down Cane Fork Road every morning now, and nobody slows behind it anymore, except the ones headed to the farm themselves, to buy. The trough gets poured full, and the hogs come off the hillside at a dead run, like they've been called by name, and up past the lot, in the long, dim aging house, better than 2,000 hams hang in the hickory-smelling dark, doing the only thing a real one ever does: waiting. I keep thinking about the fact that the most valuable thing on that farm was a sentence nobody could read without a flashlight. We spend so much of our lives trying to inherit things, money, land, positions, and the whole time the people who love us are trying to hand us something quieter, a way of standing still while a thing becomes what it's going to be. Ezell didn't get rich off whey. He got rich off the patience to find out what whey was worth. Most of us drive past our own version of that tank truck every day with the windows up. I hope this story makes at least one of us pull over. This is a work of true-to-life fiction, inspired by the kind of stories rural America remembers. All characters, names, businesses, and places are creative inventions, and any resemblance to actual persons or establishments is coincidental.